Hi again. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about elemental dignities and the general rules that come with those. This is for learning to read the opening of the key spread. This is a technique that you will be using in all 5 operations, and it's just a good skill set to have, I think, in general, if you're going to be reading tarot. So, of course, every card has some sort of elemental attribute, um, generally speaking. And of course, there are 4 elements. Some people consider 5, spirit being a 5th element, um, which is valid. But I think for the purpose of elemental dignities, it's usually best. Otherwise, it'll be overwhelming. Especially for a beginner, I think it's best to just ignore spirit in some ways, which sounds sort of blasphemous, but just sort of focus on the relationships between the 4 normal elements. And those are, of course, fire, water, air, and earth, technically in that order, if we're going the Kabbalistic route. So, so of course, fire and water are opposites, as well as air and earth are opposites to each other. So fire and water weaken each other, air and earth weaken each other. They don't like each other. None of those elements get along with their opposites. Whereas fire and earth is sort of neutral, generally positive. I tend to consider them as friendly to each other. Not quite as friendly as fire and air, per se, but they get along far better than, say, fire and water, of course. Fire and air, however, is your most positive type of relationship. Water and earth are also the other sort of best relationship you can have. So like elements like each other. So the passive elements like each other and the active elements like each other. So fire and air are complementary, and water and earth are complementary with each other. So again, fire and water are antagonistic, air and earth are antagonistic. Now, again, that example of fire and earth, it's technically an active element and a passive element, so there's some ambivalence. It's neutral, but it's friendly at the same time. It's sort of supportive and not necessarily detrimental. Same thing with water and air. Water and air is not necessarily a bad combination, sort of neutral, generally seen as positive. And it's helpful to see it that way. Otherwise, you get almost so many shades of gray that you won't actually be able to give a reading, and you'll be there for 4 hours instead of 2. So, essentially how this works is there are several types of triads you can have. They work in triads. And so, I'll just pull a totally random one from my deck. Here's an example of a triad. We've got the 8 of discs, the 8 of wands, surrounded by the Princess of Swords and the Fool on the other side. So now, in a triad, we always read the center card. This is sort of, in the hierarchy, the center card is what you want to be talking about. Okay, so when you evaluate a triad, always focus on the center card. You know, other people argue that you should be, thinking about the relationships with the other cards, and if there's a stronger card on the side, focus more on that. And it's like, well, no, that's not what the Golden Dawn actually said, and it's sort of unhelpful. I don't find it helpful advice. If you find that to be a better way of going about it in your experience, then so be it. But for me, it's helpful to just always focus on the center card and how it's being affected on the sides. So the 8 of Wands, being a wand, is a fire card. So of course all the wands are fire, all the cups are water, all the air, all the swords are air, and all the discs, pentacles, coins, etc. are earth. Okay, those also are connected to the 4 letters of Tetragrammaton, Yod being fire, He primal being water, Vav being air, and He final being earth. Okay, so here we have a fire card in the 8 of Wands being surrounded by an air card, the Fool, who is the element of air, and that's his attribute, and the Princess of Swords, which is also air. Now, this is another issue here. Court cards technically have two elements. She is technically Earth of air, because she is somewhere positioned in Tetragrammaton. She's Hey Final, being a princess. And so technically, Hey Final being associated with Earth, she's technically Earth of air. For instance, the King or Knight of Swords, depending on what deck you're using, the paternal sword person would be fire of air. The Queen of Cups would be water of water, because the queens are Hay primal. The Prince of Wands would be air of fire, etc., etc. Now, in my experience, you can do that when it comes to elemental dignities, but I think it's generally easier to just say she's air. First and foremost, she is air. Because as soon as you throw, oh, she's earth of blah, 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 and then it throws this whole thing in such a jumble that it's, again, too obtuse sometimes. And maybe with additional practice we can all get better at doing that, because it's all about the shades of gray ultimately, but it is sort of taxing on one's abilities and patience. So anywho, so we've got this triad, and so now air and fire are all active elements, correct? So essentially we see the Eight of Wands, which is a very active card in and of itself, sort of representing speed, rapidity, messaging, communication back and forth, sort of happening very quickly. We can see that that's happening particularly quickly, and because it's friendly to these two elements, these two air cards on the sides, it sort of is very, it's very receptive to those energies. So here it's particularly, there's something sort of aggressive about it because of the Princess of Swords. Maybe it's some sort of gossipy information that's happening very quickly. And the Fool is also contributing a good amount of energy too, so it could be sort of a spontaneous thing, like maybe this is an event where gossip is happening kind of out of nowhere, sort of unexpectedly, from unexpected quarters of your social life, that sort of thing. Or it's sort of just, it's incorrect, it's not quite accurate, because the Fool doesn't really, the Fool doesn't, Fool doesn't really know any better, that sort of thing. So that's generally how we would read this. Now, what if we have, what if we had a water card on one side of it, and say an air card on the other side? Doesn't really matter which. Let's have it this way. So we've got the Moon on the side now of the Eight of Wands here, and the Nine of Swords. Okay, so again, the Eight of Wands is our most important card, but it's also colored by the Nine of Swords and water. So because fire and water do not get along, we would say that the relationship between the Moon and the Wands is antagonistic. They're not happy. But fire likes air, and so it sort of is like the fire card in the middle draws strength from the air card on the side in order to deal with the issue here. So this is sort of something that is not very comfortable. And by drawing on the strength here, it sort of balances out the sapping power of this and sort of brings it more into alignment, so that the triad as a whole, the event as a whole, is a relatively strong event. That's essentially what you're calculating here, is how important these events are as you count your string, read your string. Because some events are not going to be as important as others. In this case, we have an event that is relatively strong because it's a fire card being supported by an air card, and is sort of bringing more into balance, or is attempting to bring into balance, the debilitating effects of this card, of the water card. So here, this might be the Eight of Wands, that sort of vivacity and energy is sort of dampened by sort of uncertainty and doubt and fear, and so it becomes a really tense situation. In order to compensate for that, the Eight of Wands becomes really, really stressed and starts to wonder if it's doing something wrong, if it's not quite right, because I think the Eight of Wands is also about directionality and sort of being on the right path of things, and sort of doors opening up as that happens. And so it's sort of like the moon just throws it all into whack. Okay, so that's that sort of situation. Now, what if we had two water cards on the sides? Let's say we had the Six of Cups and the Queen of Cups on the side of the Eight of Wands. Where am I here? Sorry. Okay. Let's say this was your triad. Now you have two water cards on the sides. They're both weakening the center card. So this is an event that is not really even relevant to read. The Golden Dawn tells us that we should not even read triads like this, that they're just background noise, that it's stuff that sort of happens that, you know, the querent may or may not be aware of, and so it's not really relevant. So it's, again, just a totally weak triad. Doesn't work. Now, what if we had the last possible combination is if we had air and earth on the sides. Okay. So now, again, center card is most important, but neither of those cards is draining or affecting the center card. Neither of those cards are antagonistic to the center. However, they're antagonistic to themselves. So this is when the cards on the sides have a more clear relationship with each other, and essentially the Golden Dawn says they cancel each other out entirely. Some people say that, you know, this is a conflict between elements that needs to be addressed in the background. It's like subtle stuff. You can read it that way. The traditional way of reading it is to just totally ignore those two exterior influences, and you would just read it as it is. And you would say it's a moderately strong thing, it's a moderately present thing. You would just say very generally, something is happening very quickly, there is a lot of motion, movement going on, and you would fit it into the narrative. But you wouldn't have to necessarily connect these other cards into the narrative because they're not relevant. Alright, so that is the traditional way of doing it. When you've got one of those triads where you've got one card on the side weakens the center card, and so the center card has to draw strength from another card on the side of it in order to sort of level the whole thing. That's called a bridge triad, technically, which I forgot to mention. But in general, those are your rules. So it's super easy once you get the hang of it, and allows for a lot of creativity in your readings. And it's all based on the knowledge of fire versus water, air versus earth. Fire and air get along, water and earth get along. Fire and earth are friendly but not exactly thrilled, and same thing with water and air. Okay? Any questions? Shoot me a message. Okay? So in the next videos we'll be talking about card counting and pairing. The thing I totally forgot to mention is how to determine the elements of some of the cards. There are charts online that you can find, certainly. It depends on sometimes the Hebrew letter associated with the card, the astrological significance of the card, those attributes. For all the minor cards, you know, ace through 10, some people consider aces to be spirit, but because they're associated with Keter, but I consider them part of the element. Those are just the straight element, so anything in the cup suit is water. Same thing with the court cards. I would do it that way to make it easier for yourself. For the planetary cards, there are certain cards that represent planets. So you have the Magician, or the Magus, who is Mercury, that's an air card. You have the Empress, who is Venus, that's an earth card. You have the Tower, which is Mars, which is fire. You have the universe, or the world, which is technically the element of earth, but also the planet Saturn, so it's earth, duh. You have the sun, which is, you guessed it, the sun. You have the Priestess,